Welcome everybody to the closing panel of Ideas UMass Boston. I hope you had a great lunch. My name is Doug Banks. I'm the executive editor at the Boston Business Journal, and I'll be moderating this discussion. Thank you all for being here, for staying. The topic of our discussion is diversity and innovation. One of the things that I love about UMass Boston is that when you come here, you don't see any one type of person, any one type of face. You get all kinds, and it's a delight. My background is that I've been the executive editor at the BBJ since January. The previous 3 years, I was actually at the UMass President's Office working with all 5 UMass campuses on economic development, predominantly in science and technology, innovation, tech transfer, commercialization. And prior to that, I had been the editor and publisher of Mass High Tech, which was a technology business journal that covered technology and the life sciences throughout New England. It was a sister paper to the Boston Business Journal. I've also been at Fast Company magazine, and I had been at the Business Journal prior to. What I'm going to do is have our panelists introduce themselves. Let me just talk a little bit more about what our topic is going to cover today. And then what we're going to do is they're going to say a couple words. I'll ask them a few questions. This will be very conversational. And then what we will do is you will get to ask the questions by tweeting them. And the hashtag that we're using, if you haven't been on Twitter all morning, is hashtag ideas at AT, not the A with a circle around it, ideas at ATUMB. You can also tweet the questions to at Ideas Boston. I've got a handy iPad up here. I will be tracking them and I will use them. But here's the challenge. If your questions aren't as good as mine, then I'm going back to my questions. So you're all smart. I know most of you are smarter than me, so I'm expecting good questions. So let's begin. Let me tee this up. Most companies will accept the notion that companies benefit from a diverse workforce. But the notion can be hard to prove or quantify, especially when it comes to measuring how diversity affects a firm's ability to innovate. In doing a little bit of research for this panel, I looked up Harvard Business Review. They did a study a couple years ago they surveyed 1,800 professionals, 40 case studies, numerous focus groups and interviews, and they looked at 2 kinds of diversity, what they called inherent diversity and acquired. Inherent diversity involves the traits that you're born with, so think gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation. Acquired diversity involves the traits that you gain from your experiences. So working in another country allows you to appreciate cultural differences, for example. And what they did was they took companies whose leaders exhibited at least 3 inherent and 3 acquired diversity traits, and they called them, this is, you all had a lot of technical terms, so you guys can definitely follow this. It was called 2-dimensional diversity. Now what they call 2D diversity unlocks innovation by creating an environment where outside-the-box ideas are heard. I found that interesting. What happens is when you have minority voices, but you have enough of them, they can form a critical mass, and the leaders will then value those differences that they're hearing. And all employees can find at least one senior person that will go to bat for them if they can, get the persuasive and compelling ideas across. And what happens is the people who are actually in charge of budgets and can deploy resources tend to do that, and those ideas get developed. Some of their findings included this, and this is what I wanted to share with you. Employees of firms that had this 2D diversity were 45% likelier to report a growth in market share over the previous year, 70% likelier to report that the firm had captured a new market. And here was the bad news. 78% of companies surveyed, the people surveyed, worked at companies that did not have that type of leadership. So without diverse leadership, women were 20% less likely than straight white men to win endorsement for their ideas. People of color were 24% less likely, and LGBTs are 21% less likely. So this costs companies, right? It costs you market opportunities because the company will never understand the unmet needs that exist in under-leveraged markets when they don't have access to those ideas. On the flip side, when one member of a team has traits that are in common with a customer, the entire team better understands that user, and a team with a member who shares a client's ethnicity is 152% likelier than another team to understand that client. And when you understand your client, as you know, you're going to provide services and products that they want to then buy and consume. So with that as our context, and then I think we'll also range into how diversity impacts entrepreneurship and the starting of companies, not just large companies. I would like to introduce our panelists. To my immediate left is Katie Stebbins, who's the Assistant Secretary of Technology, Innovation, and Entrepreneurship in the Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development in the Baker administration. Next to her is Bill Brah, the Executive Director of the UMass Boston Venture Development Center. Next to him is Jhana Senxian, the founder and CEO of the Sustainability Guild International. And Mohit Chauhan, who's the founder of CurrencyDoc and an entrepreneur in residence here at UMass Boston. So what I'd like to do is just ask them to provide just a little introduction of their own, a little more background on themselves and the topic at hand today, and then we'll get started with our conversation. Katie?
Great. Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Okay. So my name is Katie Stebbins, and I have the pleasure of being in a leadership position on the state's technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship economy. I have a diversity title, which is I am a geographically diverse candidate in the Baker administration. I live in Springfield, and I commute 2 hours to work every day. So it's a different kind of diversity, but one that I pride myself on. Everywhere I go, I let people know that I live in Springfield and that I proudly hail from Western Mass. I have been a Springfield city planner there for the first 10 years of my career. I was also in charge of youth mentoring for Western Mass on behalf of Mass Mentoring Partnership, and I have been a mentor to young people in Springfield for the past 12 years, which has taught me a lot about the city I worked in. And then for the past 4 years, I was working on establishing and growing the Holyoke Innovation District, which was an economic development proposition around the Mass Green High Performance Computing Center, which is a data center that was put in the center of Holyoke being the poorest city in Massachusetts. And it was put there by MIT, Harvard, Northeastern, UMass, and BU. And I was asked to create an economic development strategy around it, which we did, which included the community and dubbed it sort of the democratization of innovation in Holyoke. And so I'm happy and proud to talk about that later today.
Bill?
So I'm William Brah. I'm the director of the Venture Development Center here on campus. It's actually in Wheatley Hall on the 3rd floor. And it is the university's innovation center. It's the center that tries to stimulate innovation and entrepreneurship across the university in every college and among the students and the faculty. And I guess my perspective on this and why I was pleased to be part of the panel is the Venture Development Center has like 93 entrepreneurs working here on campus in the VDC. And as with any home, the dining table is the center of the community. And it's where almost all of us gather for lunch, and it can be quite a lively gathering. But you look at around the table, and it's like the Noah's Ark of humanity. There are, the diversity even is striking to the people who come from a diverse background. And it's really ironic because it's not something we've worked to do, it's just the reason it's diverse. It's, I think, like 53% white and the rest non-white. I think it perfectly matches that demographic from the university itself. So being part of a place like UMass Boston, which is an amazing place, that inherently welcomes and is open to just about everyone who has a really good idea, has actually inspired the kind of entrepreneurial companies that have chosen UMass Boston to launch their businesses. And I think you all were here to hear Armand talk from SQZ Biotech. He has a team of 16 people, and it perfectly mirrors that kind of diversity as well. So people are naturally drawn, I think. People with really good ideas are drawn to a place that is quite welcoming, and that is kind of the perspective I bring this morning.
Yeah. Great. I'm Jhana Senxian, and I'm the founder of an organization called Sustainability Guild. The first thing I always start with when I introduce myself is to say that I grew up in the Grove Hall neighborhood of Boston. So when I think about diversity, I think not only of myself being an academic, Harvard-trained anthropologist. I've worked internationally. I've worked both academically as well as in the private sector as a business analyst, but as a member of a community that tends to be Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan. I'm speaking in places like that, so also a lot of similarities to our gateway cities and other very, very ethnically diverse communities. As a member of that kind of neighborhood, we have a basic dynamic of being at the periphery of a lot of conversations. When people think of innovation, when they think of the improvements of neighborhoods, it tends to be who from the outside of spaces like that will come in and add value. And a lot of the work that I focus on now at Sustainability Guild is working on the ground culturally, holistically, with how do we tap the genius and the richness that is actually in community and tap that in very creative ways for cross-sector partnership. So I am now helming a major development project on the ground in Dorchester in the Four Corners neighborhood that is challenging in a lot of different ways who innovators are, how innovation happens, and where it happens specifically. So we will talk more about that.
Mohit?
Great. My name is Mohit Kansal. I'm a global entrepreneur in residence at the VDC at UMass Boston. I spent the past year building a fintech startup called CurrencyDoc, and I was also a visiting scholar at the MIT Tata Center of Technology and Design. Both in my roles at the Tata Center at MIT and here at VDC, my primarily role has been to mentor startups to help them with everything from primary market research to finding product market fit to also figuring out distribution strategy. I got an MBA from MIT Sloan, and I graduated from there in 2014. And prior to that, I spent 5 years working in financial services. Half of that time was spent in London, and the other half was spent in Hong Kong. And even before that, I spent my entire life in India. So I've had the opportunity to live in many different countries. I've had the opportunity to work for different firms of different sizes. So I started with working for big banks, and now I'm in the entrepreneurship scene where teams are rather small. My perspective on diversity and innovation is more around how people from different backgrounds, whether it's ethnic backgrounds or just people from a different expertise, when smart people come together, how they can find solutions to problems that would not have been obvious to, say, a non-diverse set of people.
Yeah.
So Mohit, let me start with you. Let's assume then, with all of the data that I was showing earlier and the conversations that you've already heard, that we're not talking about diversity just to check a box and move forward. I mean, I think that we can all agree pretty readily that diversity, whether it's geographic diversity, diversity of thought, will get to a problem solved quicker. Mohit, talk about your work at the Tata Center and maybe give us an example of that problem solving that comes together from people from different backgrounds and different ideas coming together and solving that and innovating in that way.
Sure. So just to briefly describe what the Tata Center is all about. So the Tata Center at MIT was set up with a generous donation from the Tata Trust with the help of Mr. Ratan Tata. And it was set up at MIT to create solutions to create innovative solutions for resource-constrained communities, starting with India, but not necessarily nonprofits. So these would be sustainable businesses, but created for people at the bottom of the pyramid. Interestingly enough, this center was set up at MIT and not in India. So when the Tata Trust donated the money, they wanted someone from the outside to solve some problems prevalent in India. And only after the center had some success and it proved what it could do, they set up a sister center in India so that they would also get some on-the-ground help. I can give examples of two specific projects I work with. One of them was, before I talk about the project, I'll talk about the problem they were trying to solve and how it wasn't obvious what needed to be done. So one of the projects, which is now a startup raising money called KateWorks, they saw that farmers in India cannot do anything with their land for most of the year because it's too hot and they don't get enough water. And the solution to a lot of people is obvious. Why don't you use solar panels to create something? But if you look at the cost of those systems, those are incredibly, incredibly high. So this team of people from different parts of the world, none of them from India, went in, spoke to hundreds and hundreds of farmers, hundreds of NGOs to understand the core of the problem. And cost was obviously one of it, but then they dug deep down to work on it from first principles, not from the point of view of analogy. And they realized that a lot of other companies who were trying to solve this were doing this by sourcing different parts or different things in the system to create it. And it was way too expensive. Forget for a farmer, even for a middle-class household, those kind of systems would not be affordable. So they went what I call the Elon Musk way of digging deep down into first principles to see how you could make each thing on your own, or how you could modify existing things to cut down their cost significantly. They've been working on this for about 2 years, and in that time, a group of three engineers have been able to reduce the cost of that pump by 70%. Wow. That's significant. It's not 5 or 10 or 15, 70%, because they went in with a fresh mindset. They said, let's figure out how to solve this problem, and they did not rely on any of the insiders who are supposed to know the domain. They always told them, oh, this is 60% of your cost, so there's no way you can cut your cost to anything below that. And but today they're doing really well, and I think it was primarily because they went in with an outside, fresh perspective. The other example is of another company that was trying to solve this problem for a paper mill, which had tons and tons of ash. This ash is generated from burning rice husk as fuel. And this ash is essentially dumped into landfills, which pollutes rivers, and it's hazardous for the environment. Most of the existing solutions were around, can we dump this ash in a place where nobody cares, where there's no water bodies? Could you do something else with it? Could we use a different type of fuel? But this team went in and said, let's try to find the bigger problem. Why are they using this type of fuel? Because it's expensive. Why are they dumping the ash? Because they can't do anything with it. And while they were doing this, they found another problem, environmental problem, which was these clay-fired bricks that are, again, hazardous to the environment, and they were being created in bulk in these cities. These group of two people only, spent 1.5 years figuring out how they could use this ash to create a brick that would be good enough for households, but they would also take the problem away from the factories of dumping it. And all the existing solutions were always thinking about just building from what was already in it. Nobody came in with a fresh perspective, with a fresh outside perspective to say, how do we solve it? And I think they created 450 different types of bricks over 1.5 years. And now they're at a point where multiple factories in India want to license their technology to create these bricks and then sell them to households.
Those are great examples, Mohit. Thank you very much. You talked a little bit about just problem solving in resource-deprived regions and areas. Jhana, why don't you tell us a little bit more about what the work that you're doing in Four Corners, Third Sector is helping you out. Talk a little bit about where innovation is happening there and where in the rest of it. Then we'll get into sort of the greater Boston picture. But Jhana, talk a little bit more about that, and then I think that might lead us into what Katie was talking about with her work in Holyoke. So
absolutely, yes.
I'd love to hear that.
Right. So in our communities, we have a lot of different problems looking to be solved almost in a vertical manner. So food system folks are working on the food system problems. We have climate change conversations happening, looking at what happens to make resilient communities and what kinds of solutions and approaches we actually need to deal with those challenges. We have issues of unemployment, of folks trying to start entrepreneurial activities in the communities, of public safety. So we have a kind of wide array of different challenges being solved by sometimes very different groups of folks, not necessarily working together, by a lot of consultants with expertise in that particular area coming into the community and working on the issue. So the shift that we've made and what actually helps get really dynamic, innovative ideas to the table is working from community folks who are experiencing all of these problems simultaneously and working on projects and businesses, enterprises, and initiatives that bring all of those things together. So I'll give an example. We have a Urban Wild. It is over 45,000 square feet. It's owned by the city of Boston, right next to the building that we have just purchased with our capital partners, Third Sector New England, to develop into an innovation center. The Urban Wild itself is a source of blight. Not much is happening there. People don't have access to it. So we have in the community opportunities for creating a space for people to gather, of having outdoor environmental classrooms, of actually demonstrating and testing different modes of green infrastructure that solve some of the stormwater and urban heat island effect kinds of challenges. We have opportunities to deal with food access issues by planting an array of the crops, vines, bushes, and trees that will deliver food. Actually, the inner city communities, Blue Hill Avenue used to be lined with fruit trees, and orchards were very common. Those have all gone away now. But we have these sites sitting in the middle of communities that are collecting garbage and having a lot of different challenges. So what we've done is we've brought all of those issues together. How do we create this oasis of learning, of innovation, of workforce development, of food access, of the planting of medicinal herbs that go into some wellness kinds of approaches to some of the things that people face in the community. So how do we really layer in a whole array of potential solutions into one site, one action of developing this site? This forest is right on the edge of a, right now, 24,000 square foot industrial warehouse that we have purchased with Third Sector. And we are turning that into over 70,000 square feet of innovation. So again, starting with the structure itself, green showcase, design, clean tech demonstration building, use that presence of the building on the ground in community to actually bring people in to build the skills, the knowledge, and make it a learning center. It is an active learning building. Fill the building with the types of things that people in community actually want, places to eat and gather with their family, places to learn, places for wellness and enjoyment, cultural performance. Link those things all to the, again, dynamics of workforce development, training, creating the amenities, and bringing in economic opportunity. The other aspect of it is that the businesses that are coming in, the initiatives, are led by and owned by people of color from the current communities who want to work collaboratively to actually build out a different kind of business network that is collaborative. So not a typical focus on the individual innovator or business owners, but actually on how do we work together to strengthen and pool the resources, the assets, and the skills on the ground in community. And so far it's working and really creating a lot of excitement.
And Katie, you mentioned this term, the democratization of innovation, particularly in the work that you did in Holyoke. Tell us a little bit more about this term. I'm curious where it came from and sort of what you saw in Holyoke, because it sounds a lot like the grassroots that Jhana's talking about in a different part of the state.
Yeah. So if you can imagine for a second, you have institutions like MIT, Harvard, UMass, Northeastern, and BU saying to this little city in Holyoke, we're going to put this data center, this box with a whole bunch of computers in your downtown. We're putting it there because it's very cheap electricity. We realize that only about 10 people are ever going to work there. But we're really hoping that you think this is awesome.
And does everybody know what you're referring to, the Mass Green?
And so this is the Mass Green High Performance Computing Center. And it's the cloud computing research center for these 5 institutions to do virtual science experiments in the cloud together or apart.
Sounds like fun.
It's amazing. But you put it in the middle of a downtown of the poorest city of Massachusetts, where you may have read in the headlines, the Holyoke Public Schools just came under receivership by the state. Holyoke has the highest concentration of Puerto Rican community outside of the island of Puerto Rico, which makes it a really interesting texture and feel to Holyoke. But you quickly go into a community like that, and they hired me as a consultant to say, okay, Katie, we're going to put this box here. You've got to create an economic development strategy with the community, and we've got to make this all okay, right? Undaunted by this challenge, I'd been in Springfield for 10 years. I said, sure, I can do this. So I had the pleasure of getting to go out in every corner of Holyoke and just meet people. And meet people at nonprofits and at businesses and in restaurants and bodegas and hear how people were being innovative. and hear how people had ideas and the challenges they were having to getting their ideas adopted. The Federal Reserve Bank in Boston at one point made the Working Cities Challenge grant available, and Holyoke decided to put its hat in the ring. And the requirement of this is that you have to put a broad-based community stakeholder group together to decide on one project and move forward with it. So we put a table together. It was a very long table. I felt like it was like hundreds of people long. And when you talk about the insiders and the outsiders, I think half the table were government bureaucrats, and the other half of the table were community people. And the bureaucrats are going, everybody in this city needs to know how to read. And everybody on the community table is going, everybody in this city needs to know how to lead and create their own businesses and create their own wealth. And the bureaucrat side of the table is going, but you can't do that because you don't know how to read and you have no education. And the other side of the table is going, we have all sorts of gifts and education in our community, in our world, and why don't you hear us? Why don't you value this? Why don't you respect us for this? Finally, this gentleman, Jesus, stood up and got very indignant. And he put his hands on the table, and he looked at the bureaucrat side of the table, and he said, stop looking at us as a literacy problem to solve. Start looking at us as partners in your economy. He goes, and then he went on to talk about his vision. He goes, I want to build greenhouses, and I want to float them on the canals of Holyoke, and I want them to be heated by the excess heat of the high-performance computing center that you've just plopped down into our downtown. And the bureaucrats all went. Now, the mayor of Holyoke, who you may know is the youngest mayor in America, I think he was 25 at the time, Alex Morse, and he was at the head of the table, and Alex then at that time put his hands on the table and said, we're doing entrepreneurship. And everyone else who was on the literacy side of the table kind of went, oh. Now, what was cool is over the next 6 months, we found ways to come together. So the adult basic education classes around English is now entrepreneur English. So you can go and learn English as a second language, but the class is all terms and discussion and points around entrepreneurism. Which is sort of cool. Everyone got together and went, let's solve both of our desires. So it's those kind of things that in Holyoke we've done, or we call it the democratization of innovation. Again, it wasn't that if you walked through the door of the High Performance Computing Center as someone who's at MIT or Harvard, you're suddenly an innovator. It was saying, everybody around this community, we want to hear how you identify as an innovator and then support that and respect that and make you part of the story. And so I had a wonderful pleasure to do that for 4 years. Now I'm here in Boston in a larger role statewide, but I'm really glad that I have that perspective because as you said, it's that accumulated diversity. And anywhere I am in the Commonwealth now, I have that great diversity and understand that everybody has innovation and ideas inside of them that needs to be valued. Everybody has an idea that they want validated. Everybody wants to be told they have a good idea. And it's up to all of us to respect that and listen for those and try and make those innovations.
Thank you, Katie. That's great. Having been blessed to be a part of the opening of the VDC back when it first began, I have a little bit of inside knowledge as to what goes on there, but that democratization of innovation happens every day at the VDC. Bill, I'd love it for you to share with us a little bit about how you see innovation happening in a place that doesn't look like the rest of the incubators, of which there are dozens now. 10 years ago, there were not dozens, but they're everywhere now. But at the VDC, there's a little special sauce that I think makes it unique. And Bill, talk to us a little bit about how you see that happening. What's made the VDC successful in your opinion, in the context of this topic?
Without being too flattering, I would say that what makes it successful is sitting right here, and I'm really sorry that Katie's not with us because we could have a ball together. But Mohit and Jhana are both part of the Venture Development Center. Jhana's idea was worked on there, and so we're very proud of what she's been doing. And I had similar feelings about Holyoke, but unfortunately I was trapped in a room of scientists and economic development officials that would glare at me. So this campus is, UMass Boston is one of 8 research universities in the Boston area, and it's the smallest, but it's the fastest growing, and that was the case when we created the VDC in 2009. And so the idea was, well, you know what? We have this really amazing group of students and faculty but they're really not playing in the innovation economy, and that's where all of the jobs are being created in Boston, where most people stay after they graduate. So what do we do to get this university and get our students and faculty into the innovation economy? That very much drove the founding vision of the Venture Development Center. The state loved it, helped us create the center, and we found that the students were really interested in the fact that something had been brought to them that they would read about in the newspaper, that they would talk to their friends at other universities about, i.e. startup companies and MIT and Harvard and the Cambridge Innovation Center, but they really weren't part of it at all. So we began bringing in entrepreneurs and residents who had been very successful in the innovation economy, and they began calling their venture capital friends up and talking to them about this amazing student body, and wouldn't it be wonderful if they started to tell their portfolio companies about the internship opportunities available for these students. And so 4 years later, there's been almost 200 students placed into these companies, and they're absolutely crushing it. They're rising fast, they're getting promoted. They're mostly of color, of different origins, different backgrounds. And one of the first things they want to do when they've been successful and gotten to the level of senior management in a very short order in a startup is they want to give back to this university. So our idea of democratization of innovation is to actually join the economy that surrounds us. And I think that's a common theme amongst all of us. But it's hard work. You get a lot of stares. It's like, what?
Excellent.
Huh? Where are you from?
That means
Oh,
you're
wait,
doing
have
something
you ever been to UMass? Well, wait a minute, is that near the Kennedy Center? Yeah. We've had thousands of people visit that have never been to this peninsula. I am so proud of that. It has drawn a crowd that has never crossed the Charles River.
Excellent. Thank you. That's perfect. I'm going to start. I'm looking at our hashtag, so you should be tweeting at me because I'm paying attention. And one of the questions that someone sends is a question that sounds a lot like the one I had next. So I'm going to let them ask it, which is, how can we support diverse entrepreneurs in Boston? And I'll open it up a little bit because Katie's here, and I'll say, well, what can the state or policymakers in general do to enhance diversity? And again, diversity of thought, define diversity as you will, but our collective ability to innovate. But the question that that is here is, how can we support diverse entrepreneurs in Boston? So I'll let you take that. And this is a free-for-all, so you can all jump in.
I mean, I can start by just saying that I have tried in the last 7 months, and I continue to try, and I was so glad to meet Jhana today, to simply make myself available. I mean, if I am not available to community groups and neighborhoods and organizations that are looking to start entrepreneurship programs, then that doesn't help. So I guess in my role, I'm trying to be as available as possible so that when there are proposals, so when there is a desire to start an entrepreneurship program or do something about an entrepreneurship partnership in a community, that I'm just super available, willing to listen, willing to partner, and really available and really supportive, knowing that it can be a game changer and that it's an important thing. I should say, the project in Holyoke, by the way, did result in an entrepreneurship program in Holyoke called Spark, which we do operate out of the computing center, and the computing center is now a massive beehive for community-based activity. Over 2,000 residents have had their meetings there at the computing center, and we have turned it into a tech-like community center, which is really cool. So my answer to your question is I'm available.
I would say for our project, we're going to have entrepreneurship and innovation that looks different from many other kinds of activities that are happening around our city. And so being able to recognize that, being able to tap in to what's happening on the ground and listen. A lot of our folks are not going to pitch contests. They are not getting their elevator, speech perfect. They are focusing in on what they do best and on what that kind of inherent genius is within their idea. We are bringing together others who can tap in and help build capacity where it's needed, but we are not trying to create one model of what that should look like. And I think having the ability to come in and with the openness of Skillshare, with the interest in sharing resources and listening, and not leading with the teaching of this kind of model, I think is a really wonderful way to engage at the most basic level. And you know, that's been a really important piece of it. Once you have that connection, you're able to do everything else that's needed.
I would like to talk a little bit about hosting international entrepreneurs, whether it's in Boston, Cambridge, Massachusetts, or USA in general. It's very important, as we discussed through this topic, that it is important to have these different mindsets, different perspectives, especially when it comes to innovation. And one of the key programs that was set up some time ago, I think it's the second year in, correct me if I'm wrong, is the Global Entrepreneur in Residence program, which I'm a part of. So had it not been for that program, I would be sitting in some other country, given I am an international and there's always visa issues if you want to stay back in the US. So I think that it's a great, great program. I'm certainly a beneficiary of it, but I would like to see more being done where more entrepreneurs being hosted through that program. So that would be, I feel, a key step.
And that's a state-funded program,
Yeah.
so it's very helpful feedback to hear.
Thank you.
Doug, I keep thinking, how much stronger would we be as a Commonwealth if we just connected these dots and weren't afraid to kind of develop our own measuring stick? You know, I'm more interested in learning about what Spark is doing than what's going on in Cambridge, and I'm hearing about it for the first time today. And this isn't my idea. I think Scott Kirsner, in a column just before you all took office, suggested an amazing idea. And I would, matter of fact, I would volunteer to help you organize it. And it was a trade mission, but around the state for people in Boston and Cambridge to start to connect the dots in all of our communities as well as our neighborhoods.
Right.
We could source from each other. I would love to be part of the Holyoke Renaissance. It would be so invigorating. There's probably business that we could do together. So how about a trade mission?
And Holyoke could learn from Dorchester. I mean, there's also a lot of cross-state learning we have to be doing that we're not doing well right now. So there's a lot of things that Jhana's doing that I know the folks in Holyoke would love to meet with you guys, go to a community meeting, interact, just see how it's functioning and to adopt best practices out, yeah.
It's almost a neighborhood approach to creating, a neighborhood and smaller community approach to creating a community of practice, right? So there's the collaboration, the skill and knowledge share that is really promising.
But I would love to bring, you know, Mohit and the other global entrepreneurs and other folks in Boston out to other communities.
Be wonderful.
What do you think?
I'm all
Should
for
we
it.
do it?
So let me ask you then, what's stopping you? What's stopping us from doing
Nothing. I'm going to, unfortunately, bug Katie about it.
We will do that.
that? Excellent. That's, well, that's great. We're already solving problems up here.
You're all invited.
Well, I guess my work is done.
Doug, can you, maybe the BBJ can support the bus that takes us around. It would be a blast.
We do more than just the bus bill.
Okay, good.
We're all about the conversation. So
Actually, I'm quite serious about it. That would be really interesting.
I think it's a great idea.
This viewpoint that
Yeah.
there's so much going on. Even in, if you look at there's some really amazing stuff going on that the medical school is doing, UMass in Fall River. Lowell is doing some amazing things.
New Bedford. Yeah.
So it would be really, it would be fascinating.
Yeah, I
It
think
would be
that-
life-changing for all those involved.
Well, we talk a lot about it. I mean, so we talk about innovation in Boston and Cambridge all the time. I mean, it's like the go-to word for the past several years. But so why don't we talk a little bit more about where innovation is taking place? I mean, where are the places that the folks in here should be thinking about innovation is happening that they wouldn't necessarily be thinking about?
Well, I think what I've learned is that you need to, so innovation is like the new sustainability word, right? I mean, I'm formerly an environmental planner, and so when sustainability became that buzzword, we all overused it until it just became the most annoying word ever. And I know that the word innovation is becoming guilty of the same thing.
Are we there? Are we there yet?
Are we there yet? Yeah. However, because it is still the buzzword and because we are still talking about it, you can't divorce yourself from it. You have to still figure out how to make it yours. And I think what's important is understanding in every setting, how do we make it ours? So that when there are dialogues and innovation, we're not at a table outside looking in. we're defining ourselves and saying, we're innovators.
Right.
Look, I have this innovation collaborative. We're going to sit at this table. And I think you need, that's what, a lot when again, in Holyoke, you identify someone who's, I met this guy, Gerardo, who was growing coral, rare coral in his garage, and had set up this whole tropical rainforest system in his garage so he didn't have to filter the water. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're like a self-taught PhD, ocean chemist. He's like, yup.
My 15-year-old has a collection of things like that. I don't know that
and I was like, you are an
PhD
innovator.
work, though.
And then suddenly we put him on a speaking tour in the Pioneer Valley, so that he started to go out and talk to all these different business groups, and we started to say to them, this is innovation. This is neighborhood innovation. This came out of a garage. And suddenly everyone started to see it as more than just what they had in their head on the cover of a magazine.
Yeah, my teenager has things growing in his room that might sound a lot like that, but I don't know that I'd call him a PhD. But that's a different story. So let me play devil's advocate for a second. I was reading the VDC's blog about a couple months ago, and they cited a recent NPR report. At that time, 4% of Facebook's workforce was identified as Hispanic. 2% of Facebook's workforce identified as African American. 55% of their workers were white. Google reported 4% of its employees were Hispanic, 1% were African American. So they launched all of these diversity initiatives, but are we saying that Google and Facebook, because they're not diverse, can't be innovative?
How much more successful would they be if they were more open and embracing? That's the question. And I don't know who can answer that question. But while they're playing catch-up, why don't we get it right the first time here in Boston?
Excellent. All right, fair point. You can clap. He said something good. That's good. Is there anything else on that topic? I mean, if you go to Cambridge, there's a distinct lack of diversity, clearly, right? But there's no lack of innovation. So there's still work to be done, I would argue. Katie, you want to say something? You're thinking.
I'm thinking about the fact that, I come from a region where I'm 44 years old and I'm considered too young to be at the big kids table. And as a woman at times, I wasn't quite the suit in another generation that could be at the table as a decision maker. What's interesting for me is, for the first time in my 20-year career, being out here in Boston, I'm not only okay at being 44, people think I'm old. I'm not even too young, which is kind of refreshing. And being a woman at the table in Boston has not been an issue at all. And so while I completely recognize your point, at the same time, my own personal perspective has been very interesting, is that I have felt this refreshing welcomeness in Boston, which I've been really up against in the other part of my career.
That is interesting. How many folks here are either a student or work with students on a regular basis? It's a good chunk. So we have another question here that relates to diversity, and the question is, and now I just lost it, what specific skills do students today need to focus on? This says to promote future industry development, but I'm going to go one further and say to be more innovative, to be a part of the innovation economy. What are the skill sets students need to be thinking about?
We look for students every day who are technically good at what they do, so they're detail-oriented, meticulous, but boy, if they don't embrace, if they're not social and team-work-oriented, they're not going to get very far.
Yeah.
I think the ability to break out of thinking in models that are maybe more formally received and really tapping creativity and a lot of the cultural knowledge and your own personal experience of where you come from, wherever you come from, and especially if you come from communities that are not typically represented in whatever field or environment you may find yourself in. So I think it's being able to really think about and value and bring to the table as much of your whole self as you can, because the things that may not be in the room right now, you may actually have brought into the room with you, but didn't think it would be recognized as an actual contribution. So I think that it is not only the book knowledge you're learning, but it's also having a fuller, broader perspective of that cultural wealth.
I would emphasize on what I said before. If students could think more about first principles, so questioning what you're told to understand where it came from rather than taking something for granted. I think that's that inquisitive nature, that zeal to figure out why something is in a certain way would help them figure out solutions to many other or bigger problems and help them be more innovative.
Anything else? So the idea of the challenging ideas that they're taking in. Let me ask you this. I want you each to answer it. Where do you go to get your own ideas challenged?
I go to the lunch table at the VDC.
Right.
I'll give you that, but we may have to come back to you. Mohit, we'll start with you.
I think I hang around in a community which is my friends who are all entrepreneurs. They are willing to challenge me for any idea or any problem that I'm solving from a good place. It's not criticism, but it's, hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And I do the same thing for them. I saw it written somewhere and kind of struck a chord that you're usually average of the 5 people you hang out with. And if you hang out with people who are challenging you every day and you're doing the same, it just helps all of you get better. So I would say I try to hang out in that kind of community.
Yeah. Definitely for me, it's every single day on the ground in community. We crowdsource our ideas and our actions, so it comes from community, but just being in the mix of folks challenging, tweaking, shifting, and expanding everything that gets put on the table keeps us on our toes, for sure.
You know, as a politician, you're supposed to have a very finely tuned filter. And there are times when mine is just so deeply broken, it's ridiculous. And so that benefits me in this space because I tend to spitball stuff on the wall constantly. And I got over the fear of saying something stupid a long time ago. And so you just learn not to take it personally. I'm a Boulder, Colorado Democrat. I'm married to a Republican who worked for Reagan and Bush. Like, that's where I go to get challenged a lot, is my own household, all the time. But you know, I'm really always just saying out loud what I'm thinking, and I'm not measuring it, and I'm not necessarily, I mean, you have to do that to some extent, but I'm always throwing ideas out there and seeing what comes back, and then digging deeper when people don't agree with me, and really trying to understand where other people are coming from in their opposition. And it's something I've been doing for years in a lot of my community work, and something I'll continue to do regardless of where I move up to in government. I think it's important.
Bill, do you want to add any more to your answer?
I don't.
The
The
VDC's
panelists
lunch
said
table.
it very well.
I want to sit at that lunch table. I want to hear some of those
We
conversations.
thrive on those differences, and at the VDC it ranges from scientific disagreements to disagreements about the problem being solved by an entrepreneur, as well as debates about whether meat in the U.S. is any good.
That is a debate.
Well, you know, people from Brazil have a very strong feeling about the meat here. Who would have thought?
And I'm still waiting for more questions, folks. So this is on you now. Otherwise, I'm going to start running out. We've got a few more minutes. I want to make sure that we have questions. If you're not on social media, lean over to the person who is and have them ask your question.
I think a student should ask a question. Where's a student?
Do
Come
we
on.
want to raise some hands?
Who's going to get uncomfortable for a minute? Up. I see a couple. Yeah, yes, we
Bill
did
keeps
it. We did
hijacking my
it. We did
panel.
it.
Did you notice that? Does the education system right now promote students to be innovative? That's a great question.
That's a great question. So my story I like to tell on this is I have an 8 and a 10-year-old, and I took them out of public school and pay a premium for them to go to a place that has, like, you know, makerspace learning. So what we did consider vocational education in this country for a long time has gotten so marginalized, and now we've got parents paying this enormous amount of money to send their preschoolers to makerspaces. Where have we gone so wrong? So the parents recognize the need for this tactile critical thinking and problem solving and engineering-based learning, and yet we haven't quite figured that out at the public school level, where I feel like we're still super focused on liberal arts education. And so I I took my kids out of school for a year and homeschooled them and just got up every morning and followed them and went wherever they wanted to go. I was their driver, and that was a great year. And so I believe that we've got to get better at having our kids be in sort of a more of an innovative setting. And moving an education system as a country is like turning a massive cruise ship around, maybe with 3 of them like stuck together. And it's really hard, and it's a source of national debate right now. And it's not fair that to get that kind of learning, you'd have to seek out a private solution, which not everybody's going to be able to afford, or get in a charter school lottery, which not everyone's going to be successful at. And so I think very quickly, if the United States is going to stay competitive, and if Massachusetts is going to stay the leading technology state in the country, we've got to get better at this really fast. Yeah.
That's great.
Anybody else on the education system? How does the education system help students be more innovative? Mohit, you've got international experience at this.
So I can talk about, I went to grad school here at MIT. I think MIT supports innovation in every way it can.
Yes.
It's a giant makerspace.
I think, it's I would say it's probably amongst the top few schools in the US that promotes it, primarily because one is a lot of students are motivated to solve problems, and one thing that may not be that obvious is also they have a lot of role models. When they go to classes, you have a Nobel laureate teaching you. So it's inspirational to be learning from that person and trying to get where they are or somewhere close to it. So that helps a lot. So I only have good things to say about it on the grad school level.
Oh, I don't know if I should dive in there. So I moved away from my discipline of just pursuing teaching and being a professor precisely because I wanted to shift from the world of theory to engaged action. And in my discipline, at least, of anthropology, it was very much a matter of pulling against the idea that only failed theorists act. And I think that you have that in a lot of departments, not necessarily, all of these new dynamic spaces that are based on cross-sector engagement and business, but I do think that there are many departments that what you're trained to do is to observe and articulate what others are doing. And then I think on the other hand, we have folks who are really focused on the training of folks to perform entrepreneurial creativity, but it may not actually be based in a whole lot. So I think that we need to see these things come together where there's more action coming from that side and more substance to the, showing up and being able to perform it. I think a lot of students are getting that, but what are they doing that could be informed by engagement that gives more substance and impact as a result?
Audience question. What's been your greatest challenge to this point?
I can start there. I think my greatest challenge, and I haven't had any necessarily at the state, I've only been at this job at the state level for 6 months, but my 20-year experience in municipal politics, my greatest challenge was wanting to be lockstep with a community supporting an idea like Jhana has with her community, and having people back at City Hall say, that's not what I asked you to do. That's not what your time is supposed to be focused on. This is not what the agenda is. And always feeling like a fish swimming upstream. Trying to be that entrepreneurial city planner in a city hall, which typically is not a place for entrepreneurs. And that's always been my greatest challenge, is I've always had these very entrepreneurial ideas that come from community, and getting government to pivot in an entrepreneurial way is really hard to do. And so that's always been my greatest challenge.
I have something, but it's not entirely related to diversity, so I'm not sure if it's but my biggest challenge while building startups has been, one, to understand what people want when you're building something for them, and making a distinction between what they say they want and what they actually want. So which also ties in with what they say they will pay and what they'd actually pay. So those have been some of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I think for me, it's been bringing together the different languages that are out there. So I think there's a way that people talk about, for example, this project is a development project, brick and mortar, whatever it may be. And I don't want to talk about it as a development project. I talk about it as a project that's about communities coming together. It's about connection. It's about healing. It is about value creation, collaborative value creation. The outcomes of those things being businesses started, environmental justice in action. Those are the things that come out of doing this central piece focused on people first and doing it well. So I walk in with a lot of different languages and scripts in my head and just figuring out they are not going to know at all what I'm talking about. And so I need to create that bridge language to help people understand and see things that we haven't necessarily fully built or tried yet. So that's always a challenge.
I'll just add, based on what Jhana said, that the language that I've learned to be the bridge is to listen really carefully. We have 90 entrepreneurs, and while I would maybe make different choices than they are making in some cases, I realize that they need me to listen to them, because it's through that listening that they process and they self-reflect and they are open to perhaps suggestions about what to do. So listening has been really, really important.
Well, I want to just say you've helped me to understand and see some new perspectives here today. And I would ask the audience to join me in thanking Katie and Bill and Jhana and Mohit for their time today. We learned a lot, heard a lot of interesting things. So thank you, panelists. Thank you, audience. And it is my pleasure now to introduce Winston Langley, who is the Provost and Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs. He's the Chief Academic Officer here at UMass Boston for closing remarks. Provost Langley. Thanks, everybody.
Good afternoon. Allow me, first of all, to say thanks to the audience for its support and, in particular, if I might do so, thanks to those who have returned to join us year after year for this event. To the staff, led by Ali Daffy and others who facilitate our efforts, thanks also, and to members of our faculty and students who are here. The special thanks goes to MCs, Alberto Facello III, and to our own Doug Banks for their insightful and suggestive and, as I stood there and listened, I would say elicitive help in facilitating the discussions. To our presenters, I have a special thanks, but I want to wait a bit to do so. Please know that I'm here at this time not to attempt to add to, and hopefully not to subtract from what has been said here today. Having a natural skincare guru, a behavioral economist, an innovation strategist, a leader in therapeutic justice, a medical innovator, a startup game changer, a social anthropologist, a global entrepreneur, a mobile power architect, and a global educator interacting with a specific audience, one that is interested, one that is diverse, one that is self and other motivated. At the site of a research university, which by definition is supposed to be concerned with the creation of the new, is, in my view, not only remarkable, but a special privilege. And I see the group that presented here today not simply as leaders in the public sphere, and I use public here in the societal sense, but as people who are sharing at the frontiers of several frontiers. And I hope that from this experience, we can form many, many mutually respectful alliances. I ask you to join me in giving an appreciative clap to all our presenters today. The history of humankind is one defined by a struggle to survive, whether that be economic, technical, social, ideological, aesthetic, political, etc. To those struggles is joined the struggle for the very survival of our planet. People, as we had today, who do not only embody within themselves some received wisdom, but are willing to be transgressors of borders, of received wisdom indeed, should be treated specially. They are the future, not so much in person, but in attitude. And in reminding us that all of our conclusions, whatever they may be subject to falsifiability, to be falsified, to be rejected, to be substituted for, to be extended in part or in whole. These are people who are believers in human creativity. And in a sense, I think the possibility of human wholeness. I hope that Ideas Boston will help us to understand more and more about how all of the challenges we face may be susceptible to a resolution if we dare to think differently. Thank you for being part of a community in the frontier of ideas, sharing those ideas with a diverse audience here that have linked to multiple countries, 150, and therefore Ideas Boston is global as well as local. Thank you for being at the site of the University of Massachusetts Boston, and thank all of you again. I'm very pleased to be among you.